Hello, I'm Diane, a Bible teller. The Bible has two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. From now on, I'm going to talk about the Bible, focus on the Old Testament. I prepared this video because I think it would be helpful to understand the Bible if you know the Old Testament. Let's look at the structure of the Old Testament and its contents. What divides the Old Testament and the New Testament is Jesus, who died on the cross. If you want to know about the death of Jesus, you can see the first series, Reconstruction of Jesus' Death. The Bible writing before Jesus' birth is the Old Testament, and the Bible writing after it is the New Testament. In the Bible, you can see separate titles like Genesis, Exodus, and many more. These titles are for each book. Do you know how many books are there in the Bible? There are 66 books. 39 books are included in the Old Testament, and 27 books are in the New Testament. 3 times 9 is 27. It is how you can memorize it easily. The Old Testament has more books and more contents than the New Testament. There are 1,010 pages in the Old Testament and 311 pages in the New Testament. The amount is over 3 times than that of the New Testament, and it is quite difficult to read them all. I'll say you are amazing if you have read the Old Testament from the start to the end. Genesis comes first in the Old Testament. Genesis begins with the story of God creating the universe and the first humans, Adam and Eve. So you can expect that the Old Testament is written chronologically from the creation of the world. It starts like that at first, but not as a whole. The books of the Old Testament are organized according to the similarity of their contents, not the flow of time. Books with similar contents are grouped and arranged. According to this standard, the Old Testament is largely divided into 4 parts. The first part, there are 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It is presumed that Moses wrote them. In Genesis, there are famous stories that even non-Christians might know, such as stories of Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, and the Tower of Babel. The stories of the Israelite ancestors, starting with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and leading to Joseph, are included here too. Exodus is about escaping Egypt. Moses is the main character, and this book is made to a lot of movies. There are famous scenes such as 10 disasters and dividing the Red Sea. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy describe the 40 years of wilderness life the Israelites experienced after their escape from Egypt and the laws they received from Jehovah. The second part is the history. There are 12 books from Joshua to Esther. It is about settlement in the land of the Canaan, the period of Judges, the united monarchy of Saul, David, and Solomon, and the monarchy divided into the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, and to the story of captivity to Babylon and return. It is the history of the Israelites. Since it is history, there are stories, various characters, and interesting anecdotes. It may be an easy part to read in the Old Testament. The third is poetry. There are 5 books: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Poetry is a kind of literature. There are praises of Jehovah, but also books that ask fundamental questions about the relationship between man and God and life itself. The three books of Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes are also called the Wisdom Scrolls. The fourth is Prophets, which has 17 books. After the death of King Solomon, the nation of Israel was divided into two parts, Judah and North Israel. Then they betrayed Jehovah competitively, as if they had bet on who could be the worst. Jehovah was frustrated. So Jehovah sent people to speak instead, and they were prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel were all prophets called by Jehovah. Their words are almost the same. You are doing evil, and if you keep doing that, you will eventually fall, but Jehovah will restore you. The difficulty of reading prophets is because it is repeated endlessly. If they don't understand, even though God keeps saying, God can give up. However, God sent new prophets to keep saying the same message. Don't do that. Really don't. You are going to in trouble. The first 5 books of prophets are called the major prophets, and the last 12 are called minor prophets. It's not because the prophets in the front are especially good. If they have a lot of content, they are major, and if they don't have enough content, they are minor. Personally, I like prophets. It's a little bit hard to read, but from this part, I can learn the characteristics of Jehovah of the Old Testament. I talked about the structure of the Old Testament. The New Testament is mostly about the Gospel, which is about Jesus' works, and the Paul's letters. Romans is a book of letters sent to the Roman region, and Corinthians is about the letters sent to the Corinthian region. In contrast, the Old Testament has more incidents and accidents. There are great people, but also the evil and ugly. There are sacred stories, but there are ugly stories too. I think it is more human-like than the New Testament. For me, if the New Testament is a holy sacrament eaten during worship, the Old Testament is like street food of an old marketplace. I'm going to talk about the Old Testament for a while, wandering through the shabby alleys of the old marketplace. It was Diane, a Bible teller. Peace be with you.